promise. Marcus paid $4,700 for a 12-week coaching program that promised to teach him the exact system a stranger on the internet used to quit his job at 26. 6 months later, Marcus had made $90 from that system. He'd also drained most of his savings paying for it. This isn't really a story about Marcus being foolish, though it felt that way to him for a long time. It's a story about exactly which levers got pulled, in what order, and why smart, careful people get pulled by them anyway. Let's start with the claim itself, since that's really what's on trial here. The coach, who I'll just call the instructor since his actual name doesn't matter, presented himself through a series of polished videos showing a beach house, a rented sports car, and screenshots of an account balance that, in hindsight, could have shown almost anything, since a screenshot proves nothing about how a balance got there or whether it stayed. The core claim was simple: pay for the program, follow the exact steps, and replicate his income within 90 days. Nothing about the claim was technically illegal. It's also nothing that would hold up under even mild scrutiny, which is precisely the point. The entire structure was built to prevent scrutiny in the first place. Marcus found the instructor through a targeted ad on social media, one that had clearly been shown to him because of a handful of business books he'd recently searched for. He remembers thinking that the ad felt strangely specific to his interests at the time. He interpreted that specificity as a sign that he was on the right path, when in reality, it was simply the result of ordinary ad targeting doing exactly what it was designed to do. The first lever: liking. Exhibit 1. The free webinar Marcus attended before ever paying anything. It lasted 90 minutes, and roughly 70 of those minutes were spent on the instructor's personal story, his struggles, his breakthrough, delivered with real warmth and specific human detail, including a story about his father's small business failing when he was a teenager, told with a catch in his voice that felt, at the time, completely genuine. This is worth naming directly. Robert Cialdini's decades of research on persuasion identify liking as one of the most powerful, least suspicious levers in the entire toolkit. We say yes more easily to people we feel we know, people who remind us of ourselves, and people who've shared something that feels vulnerable. Marcus didn't feel sold to during that webinar. He felt understood, which is different, and much more disarming feeling. The second lever: scarcity. Exhibit 2. The pricing reveal at minute 80. Only 50 spots were available, doors closing at midnight, and a countdown timer visibly ticking in the corner of the screen, resetting itself, Marcus later noticed, if you simply refreshed the browser tab, though he didn't test that until much later. Cialdini's research identifies this as the scarcity principle, a psychological effect where limited availability increases perceived value and can influence people to act more quickly than they otherwise might. Under real-time pressure, people default to fast, instinctive decisions instead of slow, deliberate ones. Marcus later admitted he never asked himself whether 50 spots was a real constraint or an arbitrary number picked because it sounded scarce without sounding impossible. The third lever: social proof. Exhibit 3, and this is the one Marcus says haunts him most: the testimonials. 6 former students on camera describing specific dollar figures and specific timelines were visibly emotional while explaining it, one of them crying openly while thanking the instructor by name. Social proof, in Cialdini's framework, might be the single most automatic of all the principles because it operates even when we consciously know it's a persuasion tactic being used on us. We are, as a species, deeply wired to assume that if enough other people did something and it worked out, it's probably safe for us too. Marcus cross-referenced none of those testimonials afterward. It didn't occur to him that he could, or should, until it was far too late to matter, months later, when a friend casually asked if he'd ever looked any of them up by name. The fourth lever: authority. Exhibit 4. The instructor's credentials, presented briefly but confidently, a list of professional achievements, including being featured in 3 publications whose names Marcus vaguely recognized but never actually verified. Authority, in the research, doesn't require real expertise, only the appearance of it, delivered with enough confidence that questioning it feels almost rude. Marcus later found that 2 of the 3 publications were pay-to-post platforms where anyone could submit an article for a fee, not editorial features earned through actual vetting. The 3rd publication, when he finally checked, had simply reposted a press release the instructor's own team had written and submitted themselves. How the 4 levers worked together. Cross-examine the whole picture together, and a pattern emerges that isn't really about any one lie. It's about sequence. Liking lowered Marcus's guard first. Scarcity removed his time to think second. Social proof reinforced the idea that other reasonable people had already trusted and recommended it, making Marcus feel more confident in his decision. Authority closed the loop by making skepticism feel socially awkward, like doubting an expert in a room full of people who clearly already believed. None of these 4 principles alone is inherently dishonest. Cialdini himself has spent much of his career teaching legitimate marketers to use them ethically. The scam wasn't a new invention. It was an old, well-documented set of tools, stacked deliberately, aimed at someone who had no reason to expect all 4 at once, inside a compressed 90-minute window designed to make deliberation feel almost impossible. Why it wasn't about being gullible. What actually explains it, more than anything else, is why smart people, not just gullible ones, fall for it. Marcus had a business degree. He'd worked in finance for 3 years before switching careers. He wasn't naive about money. What he lacked wasn't intelligence. It was repeated exposure to a specific combination of persuasion tactics, scarcity, social proof, authority, and emotional appeal, seen often enough that Marcus began to recognize the pattern instinctively, much like a fraud investigator spotting a familiar scheme within the first few clues. Nobody had ever walked him through what 4 persuasion principles look like when they're deployed together, back to back, inside 90 compressed minutes designed to feel personal rather than programmed. His finance background actually worked against him slightly here, since it gave him a false sense that he'd be able to spot a bad deal, when the manipulation wasn't really about the deal's math at all. Marcus isn't alone at the scale this actually happens on. The Federal Trade Commission's own data shows Americans reported losing close to $8 billion to investment-related scams in a single recent year, with a median individual loss well over $10,000, and a growing share of those cases starting exactly where Marcus's did, through a targeted ad on social media rather than a cold call or an email. This isn't a rare problem that only happens to careless people. It's a well-funded, well-tested industry aimed at exactly the kind of person who assumes it couldn't happen to them. What the 12 weeks actually looked like. The program itself, once it started, was mostly recycled material, generic advice about finding your niche and building an audience that Marcus could have found for free with a bit of searching, delivered through pre-recorded videos with almost no live interaction, despite the sales page implying direct access to the instructor himself. The one live group call each week was dominated by the instructor fielding softball questions from students who were clearly further along, some of whom Marcus later suspected, without proof, might have been paid to seed the calls with success stories that kept everyone else motivated to keep paying for the upsells that arrived roughly every 2 weeks. What actually changed afterward? The comeback, if you can call it that, wasn't about winning the money back, because he never did. It was about what he learned, how he changed, and how he moved forward afterward. What changed was narrower and more useful than that. Marcus built himself a short, private checklist he now runs before paying for anything that promises a specific financial outcome. Is there a countdown that resets if I refresh the page? Are the testimonials independently searchable outside the seller's own website? Is the authority verifiable through a source I didn't find through the seller themselves? And would I still want this if I had a full week to think it over instead of 90 minutes? boring questions, unglamorous. Since then, they've helped him avoid at least 2 other similar programs. Both followed nearly the same structure, with only a different instructor's face attached, including almost identical slides promoting a limited cohort. The hardest part of the whole aftermath, Marcus says, wasn't actually the money. It was telling anyone. He didn't mention it to his parents for almost a year and only told 2 close friends, both of whom, it turned out, had their own quiet stories about a course or a program they'd paid for and never talked about either. There is a particular kind of shame that comes with losing money this way, the feeling that you should have known better, even when the situation was designed to feel trustworthy, different from losing money in a bad investment or a failed business, because it comes wrapped in the sense that you should have known better and that the signs were supposedly obvious in hindsight. Marcus says that shame kept him from warning anyone for far longer than made sense, which, if you think about it, is exactly the kind of silence that lets the same program keep running on new victims. What to actually watch for? I don't think the lesson here is never trust anyone teaching anything online, because that's too broad to be useful, and plenty of legitimate education happens exactly that way. The lesson is narrower and colder than that. When liking, scarcity, social proof, and authority all show up inside the same short window, stacked on top of each other, that specific combination is worth treating as a warning sign in itself, regardless of how warm or credible any single piece of it feels in the moment. Marcus knows that now. It cost him $4,700 and about 6 months of quiet embarrassment to learn it, which is a genuinely expensive tuition for a lesson that, in hindsight, could have fit on an index card. He did eventually tell the 2 former lunch friends who'd also lost money to similar programs that they should go public with it in whatever small way felt manageable, even just a private group chat warning. Neither of them has taken any action to address it as of this recording. Marcus understands why. He also thinks it's the exact reason these programs keep finding new customers instead of running out of them.